So as we've been working through our code, there's a number of occasions where we've had to just do a whole bunch of these copy and pastes and just write it a bunch of times in order for us to actually get the value that we're looking for. So there is a better way. So if you want to essentially loop through a block of code multiple times and get an output on it, so let's say I wanted to console log out what A was as I'm incrementing it, and really this is quite a lot of writing to accomplish that. And again, of course, it's probably easier just to do it like this, where I need to copy and paste it out, and now when I can go in here I can see that A is in fact it's increasing. So the better way to do this, if I wanted to loop through it, is I can set a value of, so we're going to set a value of I, and we're going to equal it to 0. So this is our starting value. And within loops, we need to have a condition that's going to actually allow us to break through that loop, because we don't want the loop to run indefinitely. So we want to have something that's going to actually stop our loop. So this is where we're going to check to see if I is less than 10. And we need to have one last piece within here, and this is going to apply an addition onto that I value. So this will increment that I value and allow us to complete the loop, to have actually something happening within that loop. So now when I go out here, what do you think is going to happen here when we're outputting it? Are we going to output it 10 times, or what do you think is going to happen? And maybe I can just even add in I in here so that we see what number I is at. And again, remember, we're doing while it's less than 10, but we're starting at 0. So when I refresh it, we start at 0, and we see that it actually loops through 10 times, and A finishes off at 24, and here's our value of I as we're incrementing. So this is the same thing as doing something like this. So we get 1 to 10 and so on. And the really neat thing about loops is, and arrays, is you can do some really cool stuff with them. So remember how before we had looked at, we could see the length of the array by doing, not sure where that went, but we could do something like my array, and we can get length, and that actually gives us the number of items that are available within that array. So if I started out at 0, because arrays start at 0, I can do something like output my array I, and then we'll just keep that A increment in there as well. So this essentially allows us to loop through all the items in the array. And this is really useful functionality when we are making our calculations and working with arrays. So arrays and loops work really well together, and it provides all of these really cool functionalities. Now we can work in arrays into functions as well. So we can call a function a number of times. So if we set up a function here, and let's say this function is going to do some calculation, so my function, and maybe we can even do this as doing that A increment. So don't necessarily going to return anything there. So see what happens now, and we see that we get the same thing. We get that increment of A, and notice that we're only have to call out to that function at one time in the loop. But essentially all of that code that's between this looped area, this looped content, is going to get run through whatever number of times we're indicating. So I'm going to include all of the source code in another code pen. And again, I do encourage you to check that out. I'm going to include the link to it. Or if you want to use it within your own editor, check it out and see what you can get JavaScript to do with arrays, functions, loops, and conditions. And so this is essentially the foundation of JavaScript. And knowing and getting to know how all of these, how to use this syntax, this base syntax, getting to know and use it really well is going to really help you expand out your JavaScript. As you become more familiar with what each one of these built-in methods do within JavaScript and what you can do and how you can accomplish it in JavaScript, it's going to help you build a solid foundation for expanding and using JavaScript in more complex applications and interactions with your web content.